Antifa in mainstream media and Twitter. This is part 4 of a miniseries. If you need to see parts 1, 2, and or 3, see the first 3 links below. June 12th, Jared Holt of Right Wing Watch, remember that guy, tweeted this. I asked publications who ran with a dubious quote-unquote study smearing journalists how they fact-checked it. None of them could tell me. And Quillette's Claire Lemon, if I'm saying that correctly, responded to my request by asking me to do her fact-checking work for her. When I ignored that and asked her again, how she fact-checked the piece, she told me she wasn't going to comment. Later that evening, Claire Lemon, the founding editor of Quillette, responded with, "You're an activist posing as a journalist. You couldn't identify any methodological problems when you contacted me, and you still can't. No comment is not a gotcha moment." And then she tweeted this, apparently screenshots of her private message with Jared Holt, to confirm what she's saying. The Daily Beast's Will Summer responded to this with, "So you ran a bogus study from notorious right-wing troll Progdad and didn't even fact-check it? Really?" She replied with, "Kiss my ass." On this day, the piece that we read from earlier was published. Right-wing publication launder an anti-journalist smear campaign by Jared Holt for Columbia Journalism Review. We read some of that earlier, but I just want to say that this is more or less just whining and bitching about what Lenahan put out there. I do encourage you to read the whole thing, and I also encourage you to read this detailed rebuttal of that by the Daily Caller titled Behind the CJR's Hit Job on a Researcher Exposing Antifa Journalist Connections by Rachel Stoltz. We looked at that a little bit earlier too. June 13th. In this article for Big League Politics, Quillette attacked by Antifa/Journal Mob after publishing a report exposing Antifa/Journal Mobs, Jane Trejo reports that Quillette, who published Lenahan's report, quote, is being targeted by a mob of journalists and Antifa members working in tandem, unquote. Not surprising. This report also states, because Quillette published this research, the independent media outlet is now being targeted by left-wing activists such as Jared Holt of Right Wing Watch, who are attempting to cast doubt on the findings. Quillette editor-in-chief Claire Lemon is getting pilloried by a digital lynch mob activated by Antifa-sympathetic journalists in a display that lends even more credence to Lenahan's work. Of course. The author of this article then goes on to give examples that you can read if you want to see. June 14th, the New Republic put out this. Quillette's, quote, Antifa journalists, unquote, list could have gotten me killed. What a harassment campaign reveals about a darling journalist of the intellectual dark web by Kim Kelly. And they basically complain about, well, you can guess. I'm not Antifa and they're putting me in danger by calling me Antifa. Well, again, I don't know if this is accurate or honest, but if you are Antifa, fuck you. This apparently unmasked Antifa propagandist goes on to complain about Lenahan's report and writes things that one would expect a stereotypical Antifa NPC to write. For example, we read earlier in Lenahan's own article that he denounced fascism. Well, she finds this to be hard to swallow. Now, would a sane and honest journalist put something like that in their article? Wait, there's more. As I read this, keep in mind that this person who is writing along the lines of a typical Antifa NPC script wants you to also believe that she is just a journalist and not an Antifa NPC at all. She writes, he peppered the piece with tired references to Berkeley, where anti-fascist activists have often clashed with far-right extremists, and wrung his hands over instances of alleged anti-fascist violence. Sounds like something that you would read in It's Going Down or some other Antifa propaganda outlet. She writes that the people that Lenahan says turn out pro-Antifa propaganda and who dox their real or imagined ideological enemies, quote, are doing their literal jobs by exposing neo-Nazis, unquote. And journalists with, quote, possible sympathy for people who dislike Nazis, unquote. Yeah, you are typical Antifa, you schmuck, and you just gave it all away. Oh, these people are so stupid. It's so funny watching these people just bumble. Would a serious and sane journalist seriously claim that the people that Antifa oppose and attack generally are neo-Nazis. No, nobody honest and sane would actually claim that. She goes on to write about an alleged video that she says was produced by a neo-Nazi that, quote, showed, quote, imagery of mass shooters intercut with images of the reporters mentioned by Linehan under the heading, quote, sunset the media, unquote. Unquote. My face was there next to those of a dozen other writers, activists, and friends, unquote. She then claims that Linehan's study, quote, was never meant to start a conversation about journalistic integrity or ethics or anything of the sort. It was meant to target leftist journalists, and this is exactly what the right-wing propaganda machine, including Quillette, enabled it to do on a broader scale. None of us should have been targeted in this way. I shouldn't have to worry about being murdered by a neo-Nazi. Others shouldn't have to worry about violent threats while they're doing the important work of tracking right-wing extremist movements either. June 15th. On this day, the Daily Caller put out this article that we looked at earlier, Behind the CJR's Hit Job on a Researcher Exposing Antifa Journalist Connections by Rachel Stoltzfus. I just want to say that it's worth reading this. She points out many important flaws in Jared Holt's criticisms of Linehan's research. I'm tempted to go over it, but you know, this video is long enough as it is, right? But notice they include a lot of important information here, emails, etc. And I just want to read this important part right here where it says, Holt also claimed someone posted a video on YouTube titled Sunset the Media, which splices together images of mass shooters with some of the journalists identified in Linehan's study, but does not link to the video. Upon request, CJR refused to share the YouTube video with Linehan. The video was, as of this article, nowhere to be found on the web. So again, folks, I think it's worth reading this entire article, but it's too long to include in this video. June 18th, Quillette published a black eye for the Columbia Journalism Review by Jonathan Kay, in which he shames the Columbia Journalism Review along with the SPLC and other, quote, watchdog organizations that once prized themselves on fastidious neutrality, unquote, and, quote, now lend their voices to fashionable ideological postures, unquote. More specifically, he describes in some detail how Jared Holt's propaganda piece, quote, contains important mistakes and intellectual dishonest reporting. Worst of all, Holt doesn't appear to understand Linehan's methodology, unquote. Kay also wrote, quote, notwithstanding the dramatic CJR headline, Holt didn't even pretend to identify any real errors in Linehan's analysis, unquote. Kay then goes on to defend Linehan's methodology in some detail. Kay then summarizes, quote, in other words, the analysis that Holt characterizes as some kind of dangerous plot against progressive journalists is basically just a study of media bias, the sort of subject that, until recently, CJR was known for covering dispassionately, unquote. Kay concludes, quote, essays attacking the left or the right-wing bias of this or that media outlet are, of course, old hat in my business, but CJR is a special case. It is a respected and venerable institution. We need outlets like CJR and, yes, the CAG and SPLC to act as voices of authority when writers, editors, and broadcasters go astray. One hopes that this cautionary tale and others like it help lead them back to their original mission. Unquote. This is the end of part 4. To make sure you see part 5, subscribe to us on BitChute. You can't rely on YouTube. Our days are numbered on YouTube anyway, so see the link below to our BitChute channel. Liberty, strength, honor, honesty, justice, truth, and love. Thanks for watching.